Welcome to the show, Julie. Thank you for being here. I am excited to talk with you about not just your first book and your second book, but you have a third book coming out as well, and just the transformation you made from a freelance writer to an author and the business of that. But let's just get started. Tell me a little bit about your background that made you decide to go from a freelance writer to writing books. And again, thanks for being here.
Yeah, no, very excited to be here. So I am still a freelance writer. That's my day job. That's what pays the bills, feeds my kids. But
Yes.
I realized it doesn't feed my soul. It doesn't feed my creativity. And, I guess when I lost my mother, I realized life is short and I can keep doing the work that pays the bills, or I can also do the work that's going to make me inspired. And that's when I decided to write my first book. So being an author is definitely I love writing books. It is so fun for me. And it's almost like my side hobby, let's say. And it's during the week and I write books on the weekends.
Well, it's a really good balance. I always say when I decided to switch careers or become an entrepreneur and leave what I was doing before, I just wanted to figure out a way to feed my kid and feed my soul and be home by 3 o'clock when he got home from school. I say it all the time because it is difficult to find a way to get paid for the passions we have. But sometimes you take jobs, there's some jobs that I had along the way that were freelance that did enable me to work from anywhere, but they definitely didn't feed my soul. So I would have to look at it like, maybe I wasn't growing because it just is really easy work or something like that, or just not really stimulating work. And I'm like, okay, well, then I'm going to put this in some kind of fund that grows. So at least the money can grow, even if I don't feel like I'm personally growing. So I can totally relate to needing to have something that really does feed your soul. And if it pays some of the bills, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal is with every new book. I find new readers and that's great. I love working with my clients during the week. I just realized what would happen if I made myself a client and what
Yeah.
would I write? And I knew the answer was books. I knew being an author is really what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so that's growing up, I guess.
Yeah, good for you. Okay, so let's talk about the book that was just released, The Me List, and just give us the premise behind that book. You write fiction.
Yep. But there's
Good for you.
yeah, there's no theme in it. I always like to think about maybe I have 3 daughters. If they read it one day, what's that like one message I want them to know? So parenting from the future, I guess, but also for women reading the books. I know there's, a good story can also really just tell you about yourself. And that's my goal with every book. So the Me List was fun because it's about 2 neighbors who absolutely hate each other. Patricia, who's very perfect, and Olivia, who's basically a perfect disaster. I'm kind of a perfect disaster, so I relate. But they're neighbors and not friends until one day Patricia hires Olivia as her assistant and challenges her to write a me list, which is 10 things to change your life. And the list winds up changing both of them. So it's definitely like a story about friendship and self-improvement. But to me, the biggest part, it's about what happens when 2 women stop hating each other and empower each other instead. And we all need some empowerment in our lives.
Well, I really like that theme. And I feel like too, when talking with you about your books and how there is a lesson. Like you could write this as a nonfiction book and say, here's the 10 things, or here's this list of things to consider in your life. And those are useful as well. But to have a really strong theme that holds up through an entire story, that's really good writing. And that's looking ahead at what your goal is. Like you're saying, like your daughter's going to read this book. They might have conflict. I mean, we've all, I think, had conflict with women that we don't want to be in competition with, but some women are pretty competitive, and it does cause problems in friendships and in business and all of the things. So what do you think is the real turning point in your story, without giving too much away, that helps these women start to come together with this list, as opposed to go those separate directions that sometimes happens in friendships?
Yeah, I think the fun part of it was that everything they thought they knew about each other from afar wasn't actually true. And when you get to know somebody, you learn a little bit more. And I actually wrote this book during the first Trump presidency, when I felt like there was a lot of neighborhoods like mine that was kind of split, and you made judgments about people, but you didn't know them. And maybe if you got to know them a little bit, you could understand, and come together. So it was very fun to write these things that, the character thought one thing, the other character thought another, but the more they got to know each other, they actually had a lot in common. And some were kind of secret things that they hadn't told anybody, but they had in common.
I think that that's really true too when we think about any kind of, whether I don't ever talk politics on this show.
I know. I was like, oh, I'm just like, everything. Everybody gets together and everything's positive. I promise.
Yeah. So my point of what I was going to say is that in so many of the decisions we make in life, even how we navigate, like how I navigated, let's say COVID, for example, and some would call COVID a political thing, but let's just talk about it from a point of view of like how we navigate. Well, let me just give a different example so that I'm not, so when I had cancer, for example, like I don't even want to touch the COVID conversation. When I had cancer, for example, I didn't touch the bank pen. I didn't touch doorknobs. I used my elbow on the elevator. I was told I had to take the best possible care of myself. Don't go to a matinee movie, go when no one's there. All these rules that I had to follow, because if I didn't stay on my treatment schedule. And if I didn't stay on my treatment schedule, I might not have as good of outcome for survival. And so I brought in with me, and I bring it in with me, a flu season, whatever it is, I bring in those things that are just instilled in me. I don't love necessarily that they're part of me, but they kept me healthy then and they keep me healthier now. And I mean, I would be considered a germaphobe to most people, but I only bring that up to say that we come into situations with our life experience, and it is the basis for the decisions we make. And if you don't know someone's entire story or why they are the way they are, then you're just sitting from a place of judgment instead of empathy or even respect for where they've come from.
And that's exactly the heart of the book. It's about judgment. And I actually wrote the tone of the book is the most judgy, sarcastic tone ever. It was so fun to write, but that was my, whole point of it, is that we judge without really knowing, and we're all humans underneath. And the beauty of the book is that the two characters do realize that.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about this list and then your first book and then the next book that's coming out. We'll be back in just a moment. We're back talking with you, Julie, about your current book, The Me List. And you let us know in the first segment, it's based on these two women who are not would seemingly not be a good match for friendship. And they come up, one of them comes up with the Me List and gets the other to start thinking about what that list would look like for them. And when you talk about the Me List, tell us what you mean by that in terms of this story, but also just the overall theme of what you're talking about in the book.
Yeah, so in the book, a Me List is 10 things. And the most important part is it has to do with you. And for the mother in the book, it's really hard for her to just think about herself because she's kind of been in mom mode. She's been with her daughter, and her daughter's just kind of going to kindergarten. And so for the first time in a while, she's remembering herself. And what does she want to do? And what brings her joy? And what has she let go of? Because, motherhood is always a balance of, I love being a mom, but you do let go of some things. And what does she want to bring back into her life? And some of them are small things, like joining a book club is one. Some of them are bigger, like mending the relationship with her mother, a little tougher, and things in between. So it's really just 10 things that will bring joy or maybe a little bit of self-growth. And at the end of the book, there is a spot where if the readers want, they can make their own Me List. And I did that just because I love a good list. But the cool part is readers send me their lists, and they are so inspiring. And it's everything from I want to go hiking more to I want to take a class to I want to move somewhere new. Like it's been pretty cool to see all the things that people have put on their list.
Well, when you and I first connected, I love that the list. It's something I like the small tangible things and then the bigger things too, because some of them would just, you have to be more calculated and be patient and do the work that it takes to make them happen. Other things are just go for that hike, right? Make time for it. And sometimes that can be hard too. But one of the things that you and I talked about before starting this interview was you had taken a look at my website and things about the Don't Wait Project. And that was the thing that I was trying to get to, because you were even talking about how some things you just kind of, they fall aside. And I think that there are things that we give up on along the way for whatever reason. We can be, too tired at the end of the day or too overwhelmed to broke. Maybe we can't afford to do some of those things, or we're emotionally feeling that broken. But I do think that having some sense of not urgency, some people say, oh, is the Don't Wait Project like a bucket list? And I always say it isn't, because to me, a bucket list is these are things you want to do if you, just like the movie, if you find out you have limited time, you're going to go do these things. And the reality for me is I would not be talking with you. I would be with my family if I knew that, if I knew it was that kind of limited time, like in the film that the bucket list is based on. Instead, it's like, let's assume we're here for 100 years. What are we doing with that time? And how does that look for us? And so there is not that sense of urgency that if you don't do it, you're failing, but you start to dream again and you start to think about what you wanted for your life. And when things get in the way, you can just take a hiatus and regroup and then go back to those things that you tried. The me list, whatever that looks like for the person who's making the list.
Yeah, and the thing I love about the me list is it doesn't have to be big things. Like when you take that moment to think, what would make my day have more joy? Like sometimes it is, hey, I want to go for a cup of coffee. I want to make time for that. Or this is a really silly one, but it's true for me. I bought really comfy socks. And that sounds so silly, but it's lovely. I work at home. I usually wear like whatever socks. But instead I bought these really comfy ones that I'd seen because I'm always at home, and why not have that moment of comfort? So every day when I put on my silly but very comfy socks, it's like, oh, this is just a little moment of self-care because I deserve it. And it's okay to like have those moments. Whereas as a mother, I think for so long I was like, my kids had the good clothes, they had this, and I was so used to like doing without that I forgot like how to kind of put back into myself. And that's important too.
Well, it's good practice for when your kids leave the nest, because I've been an empty nester now. My goodness, I just realized it's been almost 4 years since my son graduated. So that's like almost 8 years he's been gone. And I'm just now starting to figure out, what do I want to do? How do I want to live? What does my routine look like? And that me list changes. It's completely different than when you have kids at home, and your priorities are them and making sure that they're okay and they have what they need. But I really like the theme-based idea of your books and how you stay strong in them. So let's take a break, and we come back. I want to talk about your first book, how it came about and how it relates to the theme that goes on in your next two books. So the me list, and then you have another book coming out. We'll be back in just a moment. We're back with Julee Balko, and we've talked about your first two books, The Things We Keep, we're about to talk about, and then the me list we've already talked about, and then we'll finish up with your third book that's coming out soon. But the Things We Keep, that's based on a grief story.
It is. So, when I lost my mother, I was 30. I had just had my first kid, and I was basically doing hospice while my first year of motherhood, which most of my friends were not going through. And I found grief really lonely and hard. And I read a lot of fiction books, and I guess my own books, that's why I love having themes, is I learn a lot about life and myself through fiction. And I felt like no fiction book had really set me up for grief. And I thought one day I'm going to write a book and use grief as a theme. And that way anybody going through it won't feel alone. They'll feel seen. So I kind of had that little idea, but had a new baby. So it kept going on. And then a few years later, I had twins. And nothing makes you miss your mother more than when you have two babies. And my grief came back very strong. And I thought, okay, I obviously need some therapy, but also maybe I need to write. And so I did. I started writing The Things We Keep and trying to capture all those things I was feeling and all the emotions and capture it in a story that I thought would be compelling.
Well, and that's therapy too.
Yep.
One of the things, and I'm sorry for the loss of your mom, I lost my dad last year, and I just started writing again. I haven't written a book in a long time. I write regularly for my work and what I do, but I haven't sat down to write a piece of work. And I think grief does that to me, for me and to me. And I do agree that some of the books you read, particularly fiction, like you said, it just gives you a couple of pages, maybe a chapter of it, and then you're on to the next part because maybe they think the reader doesn't want to get stuck in that place. But it's relatable. It's more relatable when it's real like that. It was important for it to be real for you.
It was. I think it's more healing. And, I knew it was a book that would make readers cry. And I thought that that was okay. A good book can kind of heal you. What I didn't expect is actually 2 weeks after I found out I was getting published, my father passed. And my dad's like my favorite person. And I kept my last name because if I ever became an author, I knew I wanted to honor him. So I was actually editing the book while going through grief. And I think it made it that much better of a book, but that much more heartbreaking because I really, was feeling all the feelings. But the amount of readers that have written me and told me like just how true it felt to them and how it made them kind of process their own emotions makes me so glad I wrote it.
And when you say, so the things we keep, what would you say for yourself are the things you've kept from both your mom and your dad?
And it is kind of where the title comes. It's things we keep, tangibly. Like I'm staring at an artwork that my father had on his wall that I have in my house, and it makes me smile. Obviously, I kept his last name. My mom, I definitely kept. She was a feisty woman, and so am I. And I don't think I appreciated that at the time. There are things you keep after you lose someone that you're so thankful for. But at the time, it's your mom or it's your dad, and you don't really process it till after. And that's a tough part about grief too, is I feel like the processing after someone's gone is so long and sometimes beautiful, but you can't share that with them.
Well, and we don't know the triggers, right? I mean, you were going through the loss of your mom with your first child, and then you had twins. And I find that a lot of the grief that I have that lingers from losing my husband, it's been almost 21 years, is directly related to what my son, what milestones, what rites of passage that his dad isn't here for. And I think too, having lost my dad, there is the person who I loved, who I lost, my husband, and then there's the person who taught me how to choose who to love. And and he was a constant, right? And all of our parents, ideally, hopefully, if they're taking good care of us in the world, they're with us throughout our entire lives until they leave the planet. And I was blessed to have a dad like that. And my mom and I are very close too. But I do think that we start to see ourselves. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily that we don't necessarily see what they've taught us until they're gone, because that's just the way grief is. I think what is sad or more difficult is if we don't let that happen, that we don't lean into grief and know that there are lessons to be learned. Here I am 21 years later, and I'm still learning from that loss. And I know that I'll learn from my dad the rest of my life. And I know my mom will be on the planet forever. And so I'm really trying to appreciate what I have, but also learn and keep those lessons that are only from them.
Yeah, and the things we keep, definitely the character and the mother in it have kind of a contentious relationship, and that makes grief tougher too. It's not always a pretty story.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always good memories.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure I kind of brought that to life as well.
Well, in your book, Square Hearts, that's coming out next, when is that? When will that be released?
So I just signed a contract this weekend. Woohoo! So it comes out next April, and very excited for that one because while it's women's fiction, it also has a tiny bit of romance. And I wanted to take a different take on romance. For one, I wanted older characters. Most of the characters you read are in their 20s, yet most of the people reading romance are like my age. And also, I thought it was just as important that the character fell back in love with herself as much as she fell in love with someone else. So the self-love theme is huge in Square Hearts, and just appreciating who you are.
And do you decide the theme before you start to write it? Probably with the grief theme of the things we keep, but or does it start to evolve? Do you start to grab onto one direction more than another? What's your process?
I can tell you that Square Hearts started totally different. And it was more about, there are some interesting characters in it. And then as the love came about, I realized that the character was struggling with herself. And so the self-love theme just came naturally.
And in writing this book, well, first of all, congratulations on signing a third contract, because when you write your first book, you don't necessarily know that you're going to get to write another one
I never thought it.
or
I
that
never
anyone's going
thought
to
it
read
right.
it. Yeah. So you're moving people because, and you know this because you're getting these letters from readers, and it's making a difference in the places that you hope to make a difference. Of the letters you've received, what are some that stand out the most between either of your first two books?
The first book dealt with breast cancer, which is what my mother passed away from, and actually what my husband's a scientist. It's what he studies. So I was able to kind of interview him for the book and just the stories. And I think cancer is, as you know, just also a very lonely, hard journey. And being able to connect with people and hearing them, like hearing their stories and what they share with me, to me is just like, I don't know. I didn't know that's why I became an author, but that's why I became an author. You know, it's just the idea that something I write could connect with them and they'd want to share a personal story with me is pretty cool. For the me list, it definitely was all the lists I got because you hope to inspire readers, right? But I didn't know. And so when the book first came out, people were making videos, they were sending me like pictures, and just this idea you could read a fiction book and suddenly want to make yourself, you know, have more joy or change something about yourself is pretty amazing.
Did any of them write to you about mended friendships or leaving a friendship that was contentious that way?
Yes, there is a lot of, ooh, I'm so glad to see, you know, friendship highlighted in this way, because I do think as you get older, friendships are different. We do bring a lot of baggage. Everybody has some things going on. So I think friendships just get trickier. So they were happy to see friendships. They were also happy to see just transitions. Patricia's going through a divorce. Olivia's trying to, you know, get back to work, and just showing that there's, you know, life can be okay. Transitions are tough, but life can be okay was a lot of readers really like that.
Well, congratulations on all of your success. I'm excited so do you already have your fourth book in mind, or have you written Square Hearts yet?
Square Hearts is totally written. It's just now in the editing stage. And yes, I know what my next book is because one book always kind of inspires the next. So I do have my fourth book, just started lightly.
And it's fiction as well, of course.
Yes.
Well, congratulations. Come back when your third and fourth book are released.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
really been a pleasure to talk with you. And it's nice because I don't often interview a lot of fiction writers because, you know, we're telling a hypothetical story. It's kind of like when you interview someone who has a movie come out, you can talk about the movie and then what? But your themes are rich and the content is rich, and it makes a difference, and it makes for a stimulating conversation. So I thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Yes. Take care. Congratulations.